The landscapes of our lives are for learning, where experience is our teacher. When we gather together to share our resources, we are destined to love and thrive. Good morning, Pierre.
Hey, good morning. It's so great. Woo!
Hit that record button and Pierre just lights up.
Yep. And the sky is lighting up out here. There's a little misting rain. I drove through it with my convertible, so I'm wide awake, ready to go. I actually know what I would like to talk about this morning, and it's kind of a follow-up resource on somebody that we've talked about before.
Okay.
You sent me the link, and it's the title of the podcast was "The Death of Conversation," and it featured Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah.
Or Haidt.
I think it's Haidt. Yeah, I think it's Haidt.
Haidt, yeah. He's a professor at NYU, and behavioral psychologist, history sociologist, something.
Yeah, moral psychology, Stern School of Business, right?
Yeah, wow.
NYU. Yeah.
Nailed it. So he's being interviewed by Coleman Hughes, a young Black intellectual podcaster, writer, and the title of the podcast is "The Death of Conversation," and it's something we've been talking about. We've been talking about narrative, and so kind of want to get into that subject, and we'll kick it back and forth. But just to finish up the thumbnail, Coleman Hughes was a student in Jonathan Haidt's class.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, when Jonathan
at UVA?
No, apparently at Columbia.
Uh-huh.
So apparently Jonathan did a stint there, was teaching philosophy, and this is what the young man was studying. And he writes to dear Professor Haidt, and he was talking about two philosophy classes that he was in. One was kind of a history of Western philosophy, and the other one was the philosophy of feminism and, queer intersection or something like that, right?
Those are opposite ends of the spectrum. The Greeks and Plato and Aristotle, all the way to the social constructivist type. Yeah, go ahead.
So he writes this letter to Jonathan and says he's a sophomore at the time, and says how different the teachers were. In one, it was fairly straightforward. You read the philosopher, and then in class you kind of picked it apart, and you might not know as much as anybody, but you had questions and you challenged the arguments and stuff like that. The other class he said it was more like church. Nobody could speak. Nobody felt comfortable speaking. It was more like religion. You sort of bought it or were shamed, basically. And his take on it was really boring. And he was completely in the dark as to what any fellow student really thought about the class. And that was the basis of this email, which then got published later as a result of it going to Jonathan and him putting it in an Atlantic article as something he got from a student. And then this young man has risen to some degree of fame with his podcast and his writing. He's an amazing young man.
Yeah.
Black and
smart.
Smart.
He's got a great disposition. I mean, I years ago I started listening to him, and I just think he's got like a demure. He's very quiet and well spoken about really a lot of these topics. So like, how many times have you and I on this podcast talked about like being emotionally kind of regulated while kind of trying to talk about difficult, challenging things, and he's very good at that. You never really know.
I'm so glad I'm so glad you mentioned that. That came through this conversation like gangbusters. He is so calm and nicely thoughtful
I think
and
it's his makeup, right? Like
yeah, no, I mean it's got to be core because Jonathan is the older, wiser, supposedly, guy, and Jonathan's going, yes, right, right. That's right. And you can hear the excitement in his voice. And this young man is just, very, very calm. His website says home to honest conversations with leading intellectuals on polarizing issues in the realm of race, politics, and culture in the West. And if you just go to his podcast with all the titles of these things, it just opens up my heart that people are having these conversations.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I found him, I tried to, when I was really trying to learn more about racism and the white privilege thing and kind of like when all that stuff was coming up to learn. And I remember he participated in a online sort of like mini conference with maybe 6 or 7 other people. Maybe Jonathan Haidt was in that, but like I really learned a lot from him. And he would create a space to have these discussions about race specifically. I just thought he was really calm and super smart, and he obviously was connected and networked with a lot of other people that he was engaged with and stuff. So yeah, pretty cool young guy. Yeah, it's astounding how young he is and how seemingly kind of wise and capable of really starting a conversation, and engaging. And
it was beautiful. It was just so beautiful. And it was the title of the podcast, The Death of Conversation. And I think our last podcast was about narrative. And we kind of kicked that around a fair amount and, came up with the idea that it's a story with meaning. And now, it was used as a moral teaching kind of, and now it's been politicized and there are these narratives that you are supposed to learn from and you can't really go against. And they touched on that where, if somebody's telling you a narrative, and I love the way there's a little quirk of conversation now where somebody goes, right? Right?
I do that a lot.
And they just roll on to the next sentence. They really don't want to hear whether that's right or not. And they keep checking in, and then they've got 5 rights, and they're down the road with whatever narrative they're doing. And so anyway,
can I just make a comment about that?
Oh, sure.
To say it another way, simply, I was thinking, I have 2 things. Number one, isn't that what philosophers and intellectuals are supposed to do? Sit around and have conversations, critical thinking.
Right.
Okay? That's their job, not to deliver, opinions and ideologies or whatever. Oh, I suppose you can have opinions, but
Socrates is a complete reverse. He never says right. He's go ahead.
Right. I just said right. Yeah. So, but that was my one thing. Second thing.
Would you hold on one second? You're saying right in acknowledging me. You're not saying right in like supporting yourself. So that's
okay. That's true. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. Or when I do say right, it's always a question, like, right? Like, but like, is that right? Are we agreeing? Like, is this, shall I proceed? But anyways,
what's the second
thing is like, it's not arguing a position or a side, right? And it's damn it,
it's a quirk.
It's a conversation and it's an exchange of ideas. And it's not personal. It's not about the person saying it. You don't attack the person.
No.
It's just a space where we can float out some ideas and we can banter back and forth and we can pick things apart. And that's what we're struggling to do. And I think a lot of the struggle is because of corruption and bullying and also a lack of trust that comes from that. Now it's like, how do we get into the arena and we're not trusting each other to have a conversation?
Well, the way they put it, Maureen, and
So we
that's
get defensive, right? Like we don't trust, we get defensive.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct on, what a philosopher's job is. And they talked about that, to have these conversations. Jonathan referred to it as a tennis. It's like a tennis game. It's a game. And you're not necessarily to win, but,
banter.
You receive a ball, an idea presented to you, and you hit it back somewhere and you have this conversation. It was a great analogy. With respect to the reason why there aren't conversations, really went back to what Coleman was saying, where he was in this class and it was more like religion and there was narrative and it was kind of intellectual bullying. And the Death of Conversation podcast went into how we're becoming more tribal, because you have to identify with this group that you are.
You're either with us or against us.
Right. And, politics even talks about it with wedge issues, and they want to, separate people. And there's an awful lot of that's gone on for some period of time, and it's morphed into very powerful kind of intellectual forces at play. So I found it to be, you sent me the link. I never would have found it otherwise.
Yeah, it's this.
It's great.
Tribalism is this side, it's this, right? I'm putting I'm pointing at my finger, linear, 4 against black, white, the opposite ends of the spectrum. And a conversation should be like this. It should
Maureen's talking to me, her fingers are pointing at each other, and now they're twirling around. Well, with that, I'm going to just kind of close the resource on Jonathan. Well, no, I mean, hand signals don't go over so well in podcasts.
It's not, Death of Conversation. It ain't good. And like you and I have been saying, like, this is our podcast about conversation and learning conversation and willingness to make mistakes and say the wrong thing and offend and whatever, and say, define words incorrectly and be wrong. And it's okay. Like, hey, we welcome.
It's a conversation.
Criticism, right. And we're just acknowledging, I think, explicitly that, it's a messy process. It's a messy process.
Yeah.
Because humans are involved.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Coleman Hughes podcast is called Conversations with Coleman. Yeah. And he was having one with Jonathan Haidt. I don't know who we'll put as the resource, Coleman or Jonathan, but maybe both. Yeah. And
Coleman Hughes. Yeah, I think. Yeah, because we have John Haidt and another one, but we'll put the links to both of them.
Yeah, cool. Well, who are we?
Well, I'm Landscapes. I am Maureen, the owner and CEO.
This part. I love this part. You have to see Maureen's face.
Landscapes for Learning. And I was saying this morning in yoga class, you come in and do yoga to, survey the landscape of your inner, being. And, and that's why the mirrors are there and so forth. But Landscapes for, and you learn stuff, right, about yourself. So Landscapes for Learning, live to learn and learn to live.
That's cool. I just put out an email at work, got permission from managers to lead a yoga class and recruited some other people from work who do yoga or Tai Chi. And so we'll see how that goes. This is Pierre from Yoga Heals Everywhere. Peace through grace, my friends. Peace through grace.